very kind introduction, and delighted to be here. As Cole said, we actually tried to do this 18 months ago before the pandemic, and I actually thought the statute of limitations had run on my apparently it has not. So anyway, great to be here. Marvin, thanks for all that you're doing here at San Houston Area Council and across Southeast Texas. And Cole, thanks for your leadership with the National Eagle Scout Association. So 3 racehorses are in the stable getting ready for the big race, and they're trying to psych each other out. The first racehorse says to the other 2, you know, I've had 37 races and I've only ever lost twice. So the second racehorse says to the other 2, that's nothing. I've had 47 races and I've never lost. The third racehorse says, big deal, I one time beat Secretariat. They hear a chuckle at the back of the stable. They look around, and there's a greyhound dog back in the corner who says, you racehorses think you're so tough. I'm a racing greyhound. I have over 200 races I've never lost in 5.5 years. In fact, I've never won by less than 3 lengths. And of the thousands of greyhound racing dogs around the country, I'm ranked #1. The first horse says, wow, that's amazing. A talking dog. By the way, if you Google Boy Scout humor, that's what you get. The jokes and the skits are as corny as you remember me. Great to see everybody, and thank you for coming out. So I was a scout in Katy, Texas, and I was 13 years old in the spring of 1976 when I was invited to join a small crew that was headed to Philmont, a high adventure base in New Mexico. There were only 4 of us. Mr. Ferguson was our scoutmaster at the time of Troop 209, and Jimmy and Ralph were 2 scouts that were a little bit older than me. I remember being distinctly scared and excited and wondering if my 13-year-old self was up to the rigors of the Philmont Trail. The 4 of us would meet after our troop meetings at the VFW Hall that spring to plan and to choose our itinerary and to review the equipment list and to figure out how we were going to make it to Cimarron, New Mexico. I remember my parents buying a steel frame pack and hiking boots at the Sears in the Royal City Hall. And I remember mowing our front yard with a push mower in those wet boots, trying to break them in before we hit the trail in earnest. Philmont Crew 629J set out from Tent City on June 29, 1976. When I got back to Tent City 2 weeks later, I was literally transformed. I had never had so much fun. From the bears that got into my pack and Jimmy's pack, which by the way is really cool when you're 13 years old, that bear went into your pack, to the rock climbing and rappelling that we did, to canning for gold, to firing black powder rifles, to pitching tents and cooking over open fires. I could not wait to return to school and tell my 8th grade class all the totally cool outdoor skills that I had in action. I was now like some kind of wilderness expert. I was like Buffalo Bill. Philmont was for me an enormous leap in self-confidence, and what 13-year-old doesn't need a boost to self-confidence? You're a room full of Eagle Scouts, so I know that all of you have a similar story. My father had one too. He was an Eagle Scout from Tomball, and he was at Philmont in 1945 on DJ Day, while I was at Philmont on July 4th, 1976, our nation's bicentennial. Scouting played an important role in all of your lives, like it did in mine. Today I want to share with you some of my perspectives on scouting. I believe our nation needs scouting now more than ever, and I support it because I think scouting is pure genius. Let me tell you precisely why. I benefited enormously from all my scouting adventures, like hiking and camping and canoeing and swimming and rafting and sailing and enduring countless mosquitoes and mud and rained out camping trips. But, like most teenage boys, I wasn't terribly reflective on how these adventures and challenges shaped me. I was in it for the adrenaline. I was in it for the fun. So upon exiting scouting at around age 16 or 17, I never really thought about it again. That is until 20-something years later when my son, Sam, ended up in Troop 1656 in Richmond, Texas. Sam had been a Cub Scout and now at 11 years old was a Boy Scout. He was a goofy mess, like most 11-year-olds, and not entirely sure what he was in for with regards to this whole scouting thing. After only 1 or 2 troop meetings, he and I and the rest of Troop 1656 headed to our first camping trip to Enchanted Rock State Park in Fredericksburg, Texas, which is about a 4-hour drive from Richmond. Due to a scheduling conflict, Sam and I had to leave a little later than everyone else that Friday evening. As I drove through the darkness, I began to go through a mental checklist of all that I had to do once we arrived. Let's see. Unpack the car, pitch Sam's new tent, because he certainly didn't know how to do that. had to get him changed and settled, and then I had to pitch my own tent. Finally, I could hit the hay after a very long day and a very long drive. I don't know if you're like me, but as parents of elementary school-aged boys and girls, and by the way, I think Marvin said we had 3 sons. We actually had 1 son and two daughters. But my wife and I had become almost automatic in jumping in to help our kids, to get them dressed, to get them fed, to get them started, whatever they needed. Well, obviously, I had forgotten a lot about scouting in 29 years. When Sam and I arrived, we checked in with the scoutmaster, Chris, and a minute or 2 later, the rest of Sam's patrol showed up. They helped him unload his gear and they led him away after assuring me that they had matters well in hand. So I set up my tent in the adults area and I wandered over to chat with the other leaders for a while, but I was really wondering what had become of my son. So another father and I finally decided to go and check on our boys. Stumbling through the darkness, we found their patrol's campsite, and most importantly, I found Sam, excited and grinning ear to ear. The other boys had taught him to pitch his own tent and to make his own camp. So Sam had just learned some important camping skills, and he was feeling a little more grown up and justifiably proud. It occurred to me later, too, that his patrol leader had just taught a younger boy an important skill, meaning that Sam's patrol leader had also just learned an important lesson, one in leadership. Even though it was freezing cold, we had a great time that weekend, with each patrol cooking all of their meals, which they had planned and executed by dividing up the tasks. Some patrols ate better than others. In fact, some of the patrols created some pretty gross-looking concoctions, but nobody starved or died. And fittingly, actually, the adults ate really well. We had some really good cooks in that troop. Our Scoutmaster Chris coached me and a couple of other dads through the weekend to resist the impulse to go help the boys. Those of you who are parents know what I mean. Our kids start off as babies, and we parents tend to jump in at every opportunity to fix their problems. My wife and I certainly did that a lot for Sam and his sister. Driving back from the first camp out, with Sam zonked out on the seat beside me, exhausted and satisfied, and, like me many years earlier, transformed a little bit. Well, I committed myself to letting my kids do a little bit more for themselves. Perhaps even fail a little bit more. I guess you're not as fragile as me and Mom think you are, I thought to myself about my son. Nearly 3 decades after exiting scouting, I found that it had taught me one more good lesson, one in parenting. It also occurred to me that a minor miracle had occurred that weekend. A goofy group of 11-year-olds had put up their own tents, had built their own fires, had organized and cooked their own meals, had washed dishes, had navigated through the woods without assistance, and they cleaned up everything and even packed and stowed their own gear. They taught each other the necessary skills to accomplish these things. They organized and divided and accepted unpleasant tasks. They learned to persevere through discomfort. They learned to start tasks and to finish them. They connected with nature and saw the beauty of God's creation firsthand. And there were no fistfights and actually very little adult supervision. That qualifies as a miracle. Most importantly, they were pushed out of their comfort zones, and they all took a big step towards becoming men. That was when the miracle occurred. Just like it occurred to me and Sam on another dozen campouts that we enjoyed together. Just like it occurs on every Boy Scout camping trip every weekend across our nation. Reconnecting with scouting as a grown man and parent, I have been able to appreciate it from a different perspective. It teaches young women and men to go for adventure, to push boundaries, to persevere, to overcome. It teaches us the discipline of constantly trying to improve ourselves, honing our skills, increasing our knowledge, improving our health, and becoming better versions of ourselves. As scouts, all of us grew into maturity and self-esteem as we explored new areas and mastered the requirements to earn merit badges. All of us learned that things don't always go as planned, and we need to, wait for it, be prepared to overcome adversity. Scouting teaches both knowledge and wisdom, and I've learned through my business career that these are 2 distinctly different qualities. A short time after our camping trip to Enchanted Rock, I went through an assistant scoutmaster training weekend at local Scout Ranch, where I learned about the beauty, the genius really, of the boy-led troop. So what's a boy-led troop? Why, it's one that the boys run. The message to well-meaning adults, get out of the way. Let the boys figure it out on their own, which means let the boys fail. Let the boys and now girls fail. Yes, make sure everybody's safe, but failure and struggle are frequently the best teachers. Boys and girls learn leadership when they're thrust into situations where they have to lead, and they learn best by trial and error. Guess what? 11-year-olds do not respond particularly cooperatively to a 13-year-old yelling at them. Who knew? Faced with a younger group of scouts failing to lend their respect and attention, the 13-year-old has to regroup and reflect and adapt and adjust and try a different approach when he or she fails. A better leader emerges as a result. As an adult like you, I crave order and tranquility. I crave peace and quiet. So this is really, really hard to endure. To us, a boy-led troop, or I suppose I should say a youth-led troop, looks a little bit like chaos. It's almost like Lord of the Flies. It's painful to watch. But in the end, it's pure genius. It's a leadership laboratory for boys learning to become good men, for girls learning to become strong women and accomplished leaders. Serving as a leader in my son's troop for a couple of years brought back so many warm, fun memories of a camporee where my patrol won the fire building contest, a crazy race where we furiously chopped and whittled a 2x4 into kindling and firewood to build a fire and be the first patrol to burn through a string strung over the fire pit between two stakes. Memories of organizing my patrol to leave our comfortable tents, to go out into the rain and tackle the unpleasant task of cooking our breakfast, else we all go hungry. And memories of an occasional word of encouragement from my scoutmaster that frankly helped make me who I am today. I'm the product of those adventures. I'm the product of scouting's unique leadership power. But there's more genius to scouting. Let me ask, what is a scout? You know it, and you said it faithfully just a moment ago. A scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. It's automatic. On my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country, to obey the scout law, to help other people at all times, to keep myself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight. You remember all of the adventure and fun like me, but when did they stick all that other stuff in there? It's like bait and switch. The way scouting embeds those noble character traits that I want to embody, that I want my son to embody, and my daughters to embody. In the scouting program, it's kind of sneaky, almost. I don't remember all the character and citizenship lessons because I was busy having too much fun. As a parent, I'm delighted when my son recites the scout oath and scout law. On my honor, to do my best to do my duty. Honor and duty are powerful words. Words you don't hear much every day. A program that teaches young people to stand up and talk about their honor and their duty to God, their duty to their country, their duty to neighbors, and their duty to themselves. That's a great program. I'd say a genius program. A program that our nation needs. I want to take a few more minutes and talk about the recent bankruptcy, including the difficult publicity scouting has endured over the past year and a half. And then, most importantly, I'd like to talk about the future of scouting before we open it up to questions. As you've no doubt heard, the National Council of the NESA filed bankruptcy protection in February of last year in order to, first, live up to its moral responsibility as a movement to equitably compensate victims who suffered abuse during their time in scouting, while second, enabling scouting to carry on its important mission. You should know that the safety of our youth has been of paramount importance since the earliest days of the program, and that scouting put in place its current comprehensive youth protection policies regarded as best practices by all youth-serving organizations back in the 1980s. Almost all claims predate that time. Most of its abuse liabilities stem from the 1960s and 70s. Certain states have extended the statute of limitations for claims back to that era, which led to a sudden increase in claims and the decision to reorganize the National Council under Chapter 11 to fund a trust to compensate victims. Let me be clear. Scouting and I and we are outraged that there have been times when individuals took advantage of our program to abuse children. I know that you share our outrage. In 2018, there were 5 known instances of abuse out of 2.2 million youth that were served nationwide. This is far lower statistically of abuse than the general population at large, meaning that scouting today is safe. Nevertheless, one instance of abuse is one too many. So scouting is continually reviewing its policies and its training. All instances of suspected abuse have been reported to law enforcement officials. Scouting sincerely apologizes to anyone harmed during their time in scouting and has supported these individuals with unlimited counseling. Most importantly, let me repeat what I said earlier. The youth safeguards that scouting put in place years ago are today regarded as best practices by all youth-serving organizations. Nevertheless, the liabilities of the past decades led to the National Council filing bankruptcy. Now, the Sam Houston Area Council did not declare bankruptcy. Sam Houston Area Council, or SHAC, is a legally separate entity from the National Council organization that did file. SHAC is a separate 501c3 charity that spans 16 counties across Southeast Texas that is chartered by the National Council to bring the scouting program to our community. Before the pandemic, we served over 40,000 scouts and have earned Charity Navigator's highest 4-star rating with an average score of 93% for fiscal responsibility and transparency. SHAC is one of 251 local councils across the nation, which are all independent of the National Council of BSA. We have our own board and charter and camps and assets. After learning the BSA Chapter 11 filing, the San Houston Area Council formed a council bankruptcy task force to best understand the issues facing BSA in the bankruptcy proceeding and how those issues may affect SHAC and how to prepare SHAC's response. As part of the Chapter 11 proceedings, local councils have the opportunity to avoid future litigation on existing abuse claims through a mechanism called a channeling injunction, which steers claims into a victim's trust fund set up to pay claims to these victims. Local councils who wish to do this do not need to take bankruptcy protection themselves, but must make a substantial contribution to the BSA Chapter 11 Victims Trust Fund, along with the National Council, insurance companies, and certain chartered organizations. After carefully considering alternatives and the impact on the local mission, the San Houston Area Council has agreed to contribute to the Victims Trust Fund. The money to be paid to the trust fund will be from assets that were not restricted and will be paid in cash. No funds will come from SHAC's annual operating support, such as its Friends of Scouting campaign, and no SHAC real estate property will be sold to make the contribution. Based on the opinion of its professional consultants, committed volunteers, and community supporters, SHAC will be able to satisfy the bankruptcy substantial contribution test while maintaining sufficient assets to successfully carry out scouting programs here in Southeast Texas. By joining with other councils nationwide, participating in the settlement, SHAC will enable scouting to continue to serve the youth of our nation in a seamless and uninterrupted manner upon final approval of the reorganization plan. While there is still much to do, I remain hopeful that the bankruptcy will be approved and completed in early 2022, and we can finally get back to the important work of bringing our mission to young people. I have to say that while it has been a grind to work through what many have described as the most complex bankruptcy in U.S. history, given the decentralized organization of scouting, it has also been incredibly uplifting to see firsthand so many former scouts join together to save and strengthen the scouting movement. Former scouts, including many from Houston, have joined together to restore an organization to which we owe much. And by the way, I should mention that the National Council Chair, Dan Unley, the National Council Scout Executive, Roger Mosby, and the World Scouting Committee Chair, Andy Chapman, are all from Houston and all former SHAC volunteers. Houston loves scouting and has been a major base of support for the organization across the country and around the world. Despite the strong support, the bankruptcy has taken a toll, and scouting must be rebuilt. Public comments by plaintiffs' attorneys and a general misunderstanding of the issues by the public has hurt our brand in my view, which has implications for the future of scouting, which is the final topic I'd like to touch on before we go to questions. So, back to my scouting experience with Sam many years ago. He had a great time in Scouts, but he was only in Boy Scouts for a few years. He had friends in the troop, but his best friends really weren't Boy Scouts. So I finally lost the argument and he dropped out as a teenager. But now in his 20s, Sam still speaks fondly of summer camp, of canoeing on the San Marcos River, and of camping with his troop in Colorado. Sam had many activities to choose from as a typical suburban boy. He played sports, he was active in church, and he enjoyed music. He had a wide menu of activities available to him, wider than I did when I was his age. Boy Scouts was one of many ways he could choose to spend his time. My membership in scouting has been slowly declining for several years because I believe there are a lot of boys like Sam. Kids today have more options for activities than ever before. Youth sports and the intensity of youth sports continues to grow. Now don't get me wrong, I'm a fan of the lessons that sports teach. The discipline to perfect one's skills, to build strength and endurance, to coordinate plays with teammates, all good. My son is a good athlete, but in his sports activities, he and his teammates only took directions from adult coaches. On the other hand, scouting teaches young men and young women to give direction to other young people. Frankly, a far better leadership laboratory, in my opinion. Scouting is, I think, unique in that. But I'm not really here to debate the merits of one youth program over another. These are all great programs. My point is that affluent youth have a growing range of options today that are, in my opinion, crowding out traditional scouting. Young people have more to choose from, well, at least suburban young people. But stop for a moment and think about the youth that don't enjoy this menu of options. What about boys and girls living in economically depressed areas? What about boys and girls living in single-parent homes? Mom is doing the best she can. She's working 2 jobs just to keep her kids clothed and fed. How much spare time do you think she has to serve as a den mother? Probably not much. More to the point, where does a young man being raised by a single, hardworking mother or grandmother look for positive adult male role models? Wouldn't it be great if for that young man to stand up and pledge on their honor that they have a duty to their God and their country, that they have a duty to their neighbors and themselves, that they are committing themselves to be trustworthy, to be loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, reverent. Would the world be a better place if that young man said those things, lived those things? That young man learned how to be a leader, that young man learned self-confidence, self-reliance, citizenship, patriotism. We have a genius program in Boy Scouts, one that has worked fantastically for over 100 years. 7 presidents were Scouts. 11 of 12 astronauts who walked on the moon were Scouts. We have young men and young women in our community who need our program. Inner city areas, suburban areas, you name it, our country needs scouting more than ever. I think Scouting's second century should see it sharpen its focus on those who need its lessons the most. Young men and young women who may not have a father at home or a mother at home. Young men and young women who don't have the opportunities that me and my son have been blessed with. I know that I'm preaching to the converted here. You're Eagle Scouts and you get the program. Hopefully I've jogged a few pleasant memories for you of some long ago camp out. That's great. But my purpose here today is really a call to action. There are units and neighborhoods that I'm talking about. Nearly 1/4 of the Scouts that SHAC served before the pandemic lockdown were members of what we call Scout Reach units. Units that paid professional scouters organized and worked. That's because economically challenged neighborhoods have more single-parent homes, more adults working 2 jobs, just trying to make ends meet, and not a lot of extra time to serve as a Cub Master or Scoutmaster. So maybe that's where you fit in. Maybe you're the role model that they need as a Scoutmaster. Maybe you look great in khaki. Maybe you can still cook in a Dutch oven. Maybe you enjoy reading by flashlight. Or maybe you can support the troop or the pack in another way, by perhaps serving on its committee, or maybe you can give back some of the blessings that you received by working on our annual Friends of Scouting campaign. You can make a huge impact on the lives of these kids, a huge impact on the direction of our country. Our country needs men and women of character, and I think that the Boy Scouts program is just the program that helped make that happen. A genius program, an effective program. There's SHAC staff present, and if you're game and you'd like to take up the challenge, please feel free to contact any of them after lunch. Really appreciate you coming out. Appreciate your interest in scouting, and Morgan kind of started with this. Scouting is local. It happens at the pack level, at the troop level, at the Explorer Post level, through volunteers, interacting with kids, and bringing them that adventure, along with the character lessons that it taught all of us. And so, those of you who have been Scoutmasters before, that have engaged in this effort and been volunteers, thank you so much for all that you do. This really is a partnership between BSA and our charter partners in support of those local units, those local leaders that really will make a huge impact on the lives of our youth. I know all of you, like me, have fond memories of the adults that you interacted with, that let you have so much fun, that helped shape you, and like me, help make us all better versions of ourselves. So thank you for coming out this afternoon. Appreciate all that you're doing.